The summer of 1940 was a time of unprecedented peril for the United Kingdom. Across the English Channel, the shadow of Nazi Germany had fallen over nearly all of Western Europe. France had capitulated, the British Expeditionary Force had been miraculously evacuated from the beaches of Dunkirk, but it had left behind its heavy equipment. Britain now stood entirely on its own, a solitary bastion of democracy, against a seemingly unstoppable military machine. The island nation braced itself for the invasion that felt all but inevitable. It was a moment of profound isolation and existential dread. The very survival of the country hung precariously in the balance. The Royal Navy was still a formidable force, but it would be vulnerable to aerial attack if the skies were not controlled. Therefore, the task fell to Hermann Göring's Luftwaffe, the most powerful and battle-hardened air force in the world, to obliterate Britain's aerial defences. The plan was methodical and brutal. First, destroy the Royal Air Force in the air and on the ground, then neutralise the Navy, and finally clear the path for the German army to cross the Channel. The stage was set for a confrontation that would decide the fate of the war. On the British side, the responsibility for defending the nation's airspace rested on the shoulders of Air Chief Marshal Sir Hugh Dowding. He had overseen the development of a sophisticated and revolutionary air defence system. This network, combining radar stations for early warning ground-based observers and centrally controlled fighter squadrons, was Britain's secret weapon. It was an untried system, however, and no one knew for certain if it could withstand the full might of the Luftwaffe's impending assault, which they ominously named Adlerangriff, Eagle Attack. As July began, the people of Britain looked to the skies with a mixture of fear and defiance. The voice of their new Prime Minister, Winston Churchill, echoed across the radio waves. He had promised them nothing but blood, toil, tears, and sweat, and had declared that Britain would fight on the beaches, in the fields, and in the streets. But everyone understood that the first and most crucial line of defense would be in the air. The impending conflict would not be a distant battle fought by armies in foreign lands. It would be a visceral, daily struggle, witnessed by civilians in the skies directly above their homes. The opening phase of the battle, known as the Kanalkampf, or Channel Battles, began in earnest in July 1940. The Luftwaffe launched probing attacks targeting British convoys in the English Channel. These skirmishes were meant to test the RAF's responses, draw its fighters into combat, and attrite its forces. For fighter command pilots, it was a grueling introduction to relentless fighting. They flew sortie after sortie, scrambling to intercept bombers and escorts, often outnumbered over the cold Channel, a perilous place to bail out. By mid-August, the Luftwaffe escalated, launching Adlerangriff. The focus shifted to Britain's defence, the RAF's infrastructure. As August drew to a close, the RAF was stretched to its breaking point. The relentless attacks on its 11 group airfields in the southeast had taken a severe toll. Fighter command was losing more pilots and aircraft than it could replace, and the strain on the ground crews and command system was becoming unbearable. Some historians argue that had the Luftwaffe persisted with this strategy for just another week or two, the defensive network might have collapsed entirely. However, a pivotal and ultimately disastrous decision was about to be made in the German High Command. A decision born from a mixture of frustration, retaliation, a fundamental misunderstanding of their opponent's resilience. The catalyst for this change in strategy was a single, almost accidental event. On the night of August 24th, a handful of German bombers, having strayed off course during a raid on industrial targets, dropped their bombs on civilian areas of London. The damage was minimal, but the psychological impact was enormous. In response, a furious Churchill ordered a retaliatory RAF raid on Berlin. Though militarily insignificant, the bombing of the German capital enraged Hitler and Göring, vowing revenge. They ordered the Luftwaffe to switch its primary focus from the RAF's airfields to the sprawling metropolis of London. On September 7, 1940, the new phase of the battle began with a terrifying spectacle. A vast armada of over 300 German bombers, escorted by 600 fighters, flew up the Thames estuary in broad daylight and unleashed a firestorm upon London's docklands. This marked the beginning of the Blitz. For 57 consecutive nights, and then intermittently for months after, the city was pounded from the air. The raids brought unimaginable destruction and suffering to the civilian population, as homes, hospitals, and churches were reduced to rubble. Section 4, the human element, stories from the skies and the ground. Beyond the grand strategies and the movements of squadrons, the Battle of Britain was a deeply human story, defined by individual acts of courage, sacrifice, and endurance. For the pilots, life was a dizzying cycle of tense waiting on the ground, followed by moments of sheer terror and exhilaration in the sky. One such pilot was Flying Officer Geoffrey Page. On August 12th, his Hurricane was shot down in flames. He managed to bail out, but suffered horrific burns to his hands and face. He would endure more than a dozen reconstructive surgeries, yet his first thought upon recovery was to get back into a cockpit. His indomitable spirit was typical of the men who refused to be broken. The stories were not confined to the British. The Polish 303 Squadron was formed from pilots who had escaped their conquered homeland. They became one of the most effective and lethal units in fighter command. They fought with a desperate ferocity, driven by a burning desire to avenge their nation, initially viewed with some skepticism by their RAF counterparts. Their exceptional skill and aggression in the air quickly earned them widespread respect and admiration. Their top ace, Witold Urbanowicz, described the feeling of combat as a mad dance, a chaotic whirlwind of instinct and training, where survival was measured in seconds. Their contribution was vital, a testament to the international effort that secured the skies. On the ground, the battle was experienced by everyone. Ordinary civilians became frontline soldiers in a war of nerves and resilience. Firefighters of the Auxiliary Fire Service, many volunteers battled infernos night after night during the Blitz, often while bombs were still falling around them. Section 5. Victory and Legacy. How a summer of defiance changed the world. By mid-September, the climax was approaching. The Luftwaffe planned another massive daylight assault on London. September 15th, 1940, two enormous waves of German raiders thrown against the capital, but they met a well-organized, ferocious defense. The RAF, bolstered by a strategic respite, met the attackers in unprecedented strength. The skies over London turned into a chaotic melee of dogfights. German losses that day, Battle of Britain Day, were devastating. The Luftwaffe's knockout gamble had failed. Air superiority was not achievable. On September 17th, Hitler postponed Operation Sea Lion. Night bombing continued in the Blitz, but the daylight battle had been won. The threat of invasion was lifted. The significance of this victory cannot be overstated. Had Britain fallen, the course of World War II would be irrevocably altered. A Nazi-dominated Europe, no Western base for counter-offensive. The United States might never have entered the European war. The Soviet Union would have faced Germany alone. Britain remained an unsinkable aircraft carrier, a bastion of hope. The staging ground for D-Day, the legacy, technological innovation, strategic foresight, above all human courage, radar, command and control, high-performance aircraft. It vindicated Sir Hugh Dowding's leadership and the resilience of the British nation, but most of all, it immortalized the few.